If I were like Jesus, how would I treat others? That's what we're going to think about tonight. If I were like Jesus, how would I treat others? I don't always treat others like Jesus would treat others. I imagine all of us could raise our hands and say, I'm not always like the Lord. I want to be like Him. But if I were like Him, how would I treat other folks? How would I treat my spouse? How would I treat my children, my parents? How would I treat my co-workers, my employer, my employees? How would I treat the young man or the young woman who might be waiting on me at the restaurant? How would I treat others that I may see in a vehicle, in a car, or others with whom I interact day to day? The Bible says that Jesus left us an example. Peter says this is in the context of suffering, and Jesus suffered leaving us an example. But he said it in 1 Peter 2 and verse 21, "For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow His steps." I sometimes give the illustration when I was a boy and we were learning how to write in school and we were learning how to write in cursive. I remember those letters were around the classrooms, and you may remember that. At least where I'm from, that's the way it was. When you had the large, uppercase letter A, and then the lowercase a, and then all the way around the room, you tried to make it look like that. And even those papers that they would give us, turned landscape and those lines pretty wide, and you'd try to fill in the lines. And we had a fat pencil. I don't know why they give you little kids a fat pencil. We had a fat pencil, and we would try to trace the lines. And as closely as we could get it to that standard on that page, the better it was. I could never do it exactly. I could never do it like that. Boy, I tried to do it like that, and I'm sure you did too as you were learning. That's really the picture that we see where Jesus left us an example that you should follow in His steps. And just like that child, that grade schooler trying to learn how to copy that perfect handwriting. They don't do it perfectly. Never will get it perfect, probably. But just to get it better and better and better. And that's what I want to think about tonight with you, is that Jesus left us an example. At least I'm telling you what Peter told us, that Jesus left us an example in suffering, yes, but in many other areas. Let me give you about 4 quick scriptures, and I'm going to turn and read some of them and just quote some of them, and then we're going to be led up to a chapter in the Bible, and we're going to look at some cases in the Bible tonight. But friends, our main goal, if you are a Christian, your main goal ought to be one who emulates, one who follows, one who is looking to be like Christ and to try to be more like Christ perhaps every day. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 27, that passage that talks about being baptized into Christ, and he says that we have put on Christ. One translation says we've been clothed with Christ. I put this jacket on, not long ago, I guess. I didn't have it on, and then I put it on, and I put Christ on. When I became a New Testament Christian, I put Christ on. Now think about how inconsistent it would be of me to say I've put Christ on in baptism, and then I'm not living like Him, or I'm not holding Him up as the example and saying I need to live as He lives. Not only have I put Christ on in baptism, that's Galatians 3:27, but Paul says that Christ lives in me. Now, he said that for himself, and it's true also for you, or it is for me. I am crucified with Christ, and nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. Friends, follow this. We put on Christ in baptism. He lives in me. Colossians 1 and verse 27 says, Christ in you, the hope of glory, and Christ in us. And then there's this passage. Let me turn to read it in Romans 8 and verse 29, and it's a beautiful verse from that beautiful chapter in the book of Romans. And he says here, this is Romans 8 and verse 29, for whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Be conformed to the image of the Son of God. Let me say something that might offend somebody. We're so tradition-based and biblical traditions are great and we need to follow those. But we feel somehow, and sometimes if we just follow a certain set of traditions, we're going to be fine. Or, if I'm, now I believe we should do this, but if I'm at 2 services on the Lord's Day, if I eat the Lord's Supper, if I've been baptized, if I'm singing, if I'm here at midweek Bible study, it's a gospel meeting if I attend, well, I'm good. I've fit the standard. No, that's not the standard. The standard is the Son of God. He's the standard. Now, those things are all important. Yes, it's important for us to worship God biblically, scripturally, properly, including Lord's Day worship. That's the first day of the week, Sunday, eating the Lord's Supper. That is, assembling together, etc., etc., etc. Those things are important. But we need to focus upon the Lord as our example in how we live, how we love, how we treat others. And so tonight, I'm asking the question, I'm going to ask it different times, if I were like Jesus, how would I treat others? I want to give you a chapter in the Bible tonight. It's Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, I'm going to be looking, I'm going to be leading our study, of course, and we're going to notice 3 accounts. Let me go ahead and mention what we're going to think about, and this will get your mind, I hope, going in this direction. And then as we read these texts, as we study these texts, I hope that we can make some good application. We're going to notice in the first place tonight that Jesus cared for people. And we're going to look at the case where Jesus heals a leper. A leper that was an untouchable in his day. This leper that came to Jesus, Jesus touched that untouchable man. He cared for people. If I were like Jesus, how would I treat others? Well, I'm going to care for people. Jesus, secondly, complimented people. In this same chapter, Matthew chapter 8, Jesus heals a man's servant, and Jesus compliments the man's faith. In fact, he marvels at the man's faith. And we're going to notice that. Jesus complimented people. Do you compliment people? Do you ever say to someone when they do a good service, a good job for you, you might say to yourself, well, it's their job, they ought to do it. Well, she's only doing her job, he's only doing his job, I paid him to do it, surely he ought to do it right. Why does he need a thank you? Well, I don't know. Why would you ever say please, or I'm sorry, or yes ma'am, or no ma'am, or yes sir, or no sir? Why would you ever do that? It's called manners. That's how we get along with people. And we might catch more flies with honey, as they say, than vinegar. Jesus complimented people. Not vain flattery, not lies, but compliments. And then the last point we're going to look at is that Jesus changed people. And this is the Gadarene demoniac. In fact, there were 2 of them we're going to read about. And this man was so ferocious he could break chains. He would cut himself with stones, and he lived out in the tombs. And Jesus healed that man, cast those demons into the swine. They ran down into the Sea of Galilee and drowned. And that man was sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. Jesus changed that man. Now, I'm going to admit with you tonight that I'm not going to be able to change people like that. You're not going to be able to do that either. But can I in some way help others, change others, care for others, compliment others, and in such a way that I might at least endear Christianity to them and endear a life that conforms to the image of God's Son? Let's think about the first one, and it is Jesus cared for people. If you care to follow along, it's Matthew 8. I'm going to read 1 through 3. And the Bible says, when he had come down from the mountain, by the way, the mountain is what we would call the mountain of the Sermon on the Mount. He had just preached Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The greatest sermon ever recorded. I don't suppose any of us who know the Bible would ever try to dispute that. The greatest sermon ever recorded, ever preached as far as we know. And he comes down and there are multitudes of people. And we're going to see Jesus encounter someone here. And it says in verse 2, and great multitudes followed him at the end of verse 1. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Let's think about, for a few moments, lepers in the Bible. There's still leprosy in the world today. Maybe it's thought of a little differently. When I've taken trips to India, I mentioned that I've done that. I've met people there who have leprosy, but it's not quite like you would think of necessarily in the Bible, but it is some form of leprosy. These people were in an untouchable class, if I can put it that way, I guess literally and socially. Literally, you wouldn't go up probably and give a leper a hug. You probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. They were very often, they had to live in colonies, away from their families, away from their friends. And I don't know how much to sermonize this, but imagine whatever your job is, whatever your business is, you have a wife, and I'm just saying from a man's perspective, and this was a man. I don't know if this man was married, don't know that he had children, but let's just sermonize for a moment. Let's just imagine for a moment, fill in a few blanks here that the Bible doesn't. But let's say he had a wife. Let's say he had a job. Let's say he had children. And imagine that. You get a spot on your skin and you don't know what it is. And your wife says, you better go maybe have the priest look at that. We would go to a doctor today, but they went to the priest following the law of Moses, Leviticus 13, and he looks at it and he says, yeah, I'm not sure. I tell you what, watch it or come back to me in 7 days. I'm just kind of making this up loosely on what the text says. And you come back in 7 days and it's spread, it's worse. And he goes, that's leprosy. You're not clean, you're unclean. And you're not permitted to be around other folks socially. You have to tell people you're unclean. In many cases, you were separated until that cleared up, and it was a terrible thing for those people. Now, I bring that up because the Bible says here that this leper came. Imagine that was quite a risk, was it not? Multitudes of people, you're a leper, and you come, and you can imagine the crowds kind of going away from this leper, and him coming up and falling down before Jesus. And you can imagine those apostles. I can only imagine. They didn't want parents bringing children to Jesus. Got to keep them away from him. You remember Jesus said, don't forbid them to come. Forbid them not. Suffer the little children to come unto me. And forbid them not. For of such is the kingdom of heaven. Can you imagine those apostles? Well, they probably almost had a heart attack when here the leper's coming up before the Lord, and he not only heals that man, he touches that man. He touches that untouchable man. And I've heard people say that he cleansed him on the way as his hand was going and all of that. Well, whatever the case was, I'm sure that meant something to that man. Why did he touch him? Why did he heal him? Why did he do this? Well, he cared about people. There's a parallel passage in Mark chapter 1, and it gives a little more information. It gives it some motivation. And in Mark chapter 1, 40 and 41, it says, now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus, and here's the additional information, moved with compassion. Jesus' heartstrings were tugged at. He was compassionate. He saw a man in need that he could help, and he had compassion for him. Do we have compassion for our fellow man? Do we have compassion for those less fortunate than we? Do we have compassion for those who have lost a loved one? Those who have lost their own health or lost their job or whatever the case might be? I hope we do, because we're to be, remember, conformed to the image of God's Son. We're trying to be like Christ. We're trying to be Christ-like. And it says, then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. Now, let me say that in the first place, this shows us that Jesus had that sort of power. Now, this lesson tonight isn't about the deity of Christ, but let me say a thing or two about that. It didn't matter what it was, Jesus could heal it. Jesus was able to, he raised the dead, you remember. And if you can raise the dead, and someone who had been dead for 4 days, as Lazarus had been in John chapter 11, there is no ailment you couldn't fix, no disease you couldn't take care of, and we know that to be the case. In fact, in Matthew 9, just the next chapter, 35 and 36, the Bible says, then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them. There's that word again, compassion. Because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. Today there are those faith healers in the world, and they're still out there, and they really, and you might be a visitor tonight, you might believe that God still gives men like that power today. And if you do believe that, and if that is the case, We need to encourage those individuals, if they have that kind of power, to be exactly like Jesus was, to have compassion and go to people like that. Go to St. Jude's Hospital with those little precious babies and children. Go there. And I drive the individuals right up there, and if they could do that kind of thing. But the truth of the matter is, God doesn't work in that way today. We're not able to have compassion in the same way Jesus was. Let's think about some application. Some application, if I'm like Him, I'm going to care for others. I'm not able to cure diseases, but am I able to show compassion? Am I able to show that I care? Am I able to help people? And the answer is yes. The answer is I can, and I need to be that kind of person. I need to be someone who cares for others. And not just people like me. Not just people like me. When Jesus talked about this sort of thing in Luke chapter 14, 13 and 14, and in this text, He said something that could be very condemning to probably a lot of us. In Luke chapter 14, 13 and following, He says, "But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed." Why? Because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. You know, all of us have friends, obviously, and we invite our friends and they invite us. That's normal. But is that all we ever do when we're doing good works, or maybe we're doing something and we have something nice? We just invite those folks that can invite us back. You know, they invited us last month. Let's invite them this month. Nothing wrong with having friends and getting together and being reciprocal in that sort of thing. But what about this idea of when I help others, am I just helping people that look like I do, and act like I do, and talk like I do, and think like I do? Or might I not stretch out a little bit and help people? You know, I'm sure it's the case over here. It's all over the nation. But boy, down in our area, and I know it's up here as well, so many people are dealing with addiction. Drugs is such a terrible thing. And other addictions, I know. But it's terrible. We have where I live in New Martinsville, there's about 3,000 people. It's a small town. One of the local police officers told someone, he didn't tell me, but someone who relayed the story to me, that said that our town's mostly older folks, just to be honest with you, in our town. Our street, there aren't a lot of children that live on our street. Used to be. That's the way it was, back years ago. He said New Martinsville's 50-50. And someone said, what's that mean? He goes, half the people are on drugs. Half the people. 50-50. Now, he didn't go door to door, but that's an estimate, I'm sure. But that staggered me to even think about that. And so you have people on drugs. Maybe it was pain pills at first. Maybe it was a surgery. Maybe, the prescription ran out and they were on a strong prescription. And then what do? Well, they can't afford things, so they go out and they buy heroin. And they're doing heroin. And then they take it to the point, I don't know, maybe there's something above that that's stronger, and then they get in deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they'll get to the point they'll almost sell their soul to get it. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. But knowing that, how do I treat people who are dealing with that kind of thing? Do I just say, well, they got themselves into it, they can get themselves out of it? And I don't know how, and this is a touchy subject, I know, and I don't know the answer to this question, but I know this. Jesus had compassion on people. He had compassion on people. How can I do that? How can I have compassion on my fellow man? Maybe they're dealing with an addiction. Maybe there's somebody that has nothing. We've been taken so many times, and I say taken, it hasn't hurt the church in the sense that we're folding up we're folding up our tents or whatever it is, closing our doors so we don't have any money anymore. But you don't know how many times people come and they tell this. It's like there's a book. It's like somebody wrote a book on the same story. I don't know how many times I've heard the same story. I don't know if these guys get together at a convention. What they do, they tell the same exact story over and over and over. And we deal with it over and over and over. I've had people come and want gasoline. They don't want gas. They want money. But they ask for gas because then I would say, well, they didn't ask for money, and I'll give them money. That's what they want. And so I just need some gas. There's a funeral, and my mom was supposed to give me money, and I came down here, and she didn't give it to me. She's not here, and now I can't get back. I'm stranded here. Someone asked me one time, I need to get back to Wheeling, and I don't have any gas to get to it. Can you put me in a hotel tonight until I get some money? I said, Wheeling's 45 minutes away. I said, what would it cost you? $7 in gas to get up there? Oh, I guess. I said, well, let me go put $7 in gas in your car. They just drove off. They didn't want money. They didn't want gas. They didn't want to get home. Anyway, I say that time after time after time this has happened. And so, what if somebody comes, and this has happened, and they knock on the door, and they need help, and they are at the end of their rope. And I'm skeptical, I'm cynical, because I've been lied to dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And so how do I treat people who really are in need? And I need to do it with compassion. I need to care for people. What about people who dress differently than I do? I don't mean I'm a preacher and I wear a tie. I don't mean that. But, some people dress much differently than I might do. And maybe they've got several piercings and they, tattoos and, down the arms and up the neck and all over. Well, do I just say, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have lived like that, and so I'm going to shun you. I'm not going to, or they wear their hair differently, I don't have a choice about my hairstyle or much of a choice about it, but even if it grew, I wouldn't grow it long down my back, but some people like it like that, and that's fine, but we're all different, right? How do I treat people that they wear their hair different, they dress different, they choose to have this or they do that? The world's made up of all kinds of people. How do I do that? Well, to follow the example of the Lord, I need to care for people. I need to treat people with kindness, with love, with respect. In fact, Jesus summed it up so greatly. When he was asked what was the greatest commandment in the law, he says that the first commandment is this, the greatest commandment is this: thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and all thy strength. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, he was addressed, that's Matthew 22, 37 through 40. He was addressing the scholarly argument about the commandments in the law. I think there were over 500 of them. 513 keeps popping in my mind, but that's probably not right. But there were a lot of commandments, and so the scholars, they would say, which is the greatest of those commandments, though? Which is the greatest of those? And Jesus, without hesitation, said, this is the greatest: love God with the totality of your being, with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength. And then without even being prompted or asked, he added, and the second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. I love that. I love that. You know what he's saying? He's saying that everything else falls under those two categories. Everything does. If you love God, you remember Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so if we love God with the totality of our being, we're going to do what God has said. We're going to follow Him. We're going to worship Him. We're going to serve Him. And if we love our fellow man as ourselves, we're going to treat them with the kindness, the dignity, the respect that we would want to be treated with. That's the golden rule as well. Matthew 7 verse 12, do unto others you'd have them do unto you. We call that love your neighbor as yourself. James did the royal law, and then Jesus would say, and we call it the golden rule, do unto others you have them do unto you, but we don't really follow those sometimes. I'm not talking about marriage tonight, but it's amazing to me how a Christian husband sometimes will talk to his wife. Do you have to follow the golden rule? Are you to treat her like you want to be treated? Absolutely. Are you to treat him like you would want to be treated? Yes. Are you to speak to her the way you would want to be spoken? Yes. What about your children? What about an employee you might have if maybe you have a business or something like that? Yes. It's all on the table. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What is this? It's following the example of Christ. And so Jesus cared for people, number one. Number two, Jesus complimented people. Matthew chapter 8, 5 through 10. And let me read this. This text is an interesting text. A lot of miracles. In fact, there are some I'm not even going to talk about in this chapter tonight. But it says, now when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, "Assuredly I say to you, I have not found such great faith, no, not even in Israel." Now, the point I'm making from this is that Jesus complimented others. He complimented this man. Well, how do you know the man heard what Jesus said? Well, because verse 13, Jesus said to the centurion, "Go your way, and as you have believed, so let it be done to you." And so, undoubtedly, he was still standing there. It's an interesting case. The man comes to Jesus. He's a good man. He's a man of some type of faith. Obviously, I have not found such great faith. No, not in Israel. But he's a centurion. He's not a Jew. He's a Roman centurion. They had charge over 100 men. At least that's the idea of that title, that rank, centurion. And he was a foreigner. And he came and imploring Jesus to come help his servant. Now, we sometimes can get that idea of servant and think, well, does this mean he had a slave and this slave is property to him? Well, perhaps he did own this man as a servant, perhaps. But he cared for him. I'm not taking up for that kind of thing, but at least he came to Jesus and he's dreadfully tormented. He's going through terrible things right now. Can you come and help him? And Jesus immediately says, let's go. I'll go to your house. Let me say, and I'm not trying to make an application. I probably have already said too much about India. But, when you go to India or a lot of places where they don't have very much, and you go as a preacher, as a missionary, they hold you on too high of a level. That's just that is true. You go there and they look at you almost like you're an apostle coming into town. And you dispel that all that you can, but they want to show you hospitality. They want to take you here, and will you come preach in this place? Will you come meet my family? And and it's very humbling, and it's just a very different culture. But every time you go preach, people beg you to come to their house and pray for somebody. And sometimes you're on such a tight schedule. You may have 3 or 4 sermons a night. I preached till midnight, and I don't mean that as Paul did, but just lesson after lesson after lesson, place after place after place. And I don't say that to say feel bad for me, but I'm just saying it's very difficult sometimes at every service. People, and when you get done preaching, and I'm illustrating this because I can't imagine what it was like for Jesus. I can't imagine what it was like. At the end of a service, sometimes you have 100 or 200 people coming up to you, and they're asking you to pray. And they're asking all sorts of things. And I would many times say, I would hold up hands and say, one, I don't know the word in Telugu for one, but prayer is pratana. And I'd say, one pratana. And I would just say, let's all come together. We're going to have one prayer together, because you couldn't just do each individual prayers. And sometimes they would be so convincing, please come to my house. And sometimes you'd go, and there'd be somebody lying there in that bed and in a miserable condition, and they'd want you to pray for them, and you'd offer a prayer for them. I say that to say this: Jesus was pushed upon, pressed upon constantly everywhere he went. He had that power that he could raise the dead, heal any manner of sickness. Can you imagine if your mother was lying at home, your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband, and there's nothing that you could do to help them, and you were watching them wither away, and you're watching them suffer, and here Jesus is, and you beg him to come. That's what happened here. He begged him, implored him to come, and Jesus says, okay, let's go. I'm coming. I'm going to your... That wouldn't have happened over... Just think about it. All the people, he couldn't have gone to everyone's house, but he said, I'll go. I'll go to your house. And then the centurion says, no, you don't have to go. Just say the word. Just say the word. And Jesus marveled at that. Jesus marveled at that faith. He hadn't encountered that kind of faith. A lot of people today will remember Naaman the leper, and he says, I thought the prophet would come out and wave his hand over it and say some kind of great thing. And is that all he's going to do, is tell me to go dip 7 times in the river Jordan? Well, then the man even said to Jesus, I am a man under authority too. And he said, I say to this one, go, and he goes. This one, come, and he comes. To my servant, do this, and he does it. J.W. McGarvey, I don't have a quote, but it was interesting what he said about that. He said, a centurion was under authority. There was Caesar up here, and then there were others, and I guess they had their senate and things there, and down through the list, and generals and others. I don't know the hierarchy there in their military. And he's way down here, but he still has authority. He has people under him. And even there he says, I have authority even as a man under authority. I have authority to say to this, to do this, and this one do that. And it seemed that Jesus was under no authority. It seemed that Jesus just in an unlimited way could just do what he wanted to and had power over all manner of sickness and illness and disease. And Jesus, when he heard that, marveled. Only 2 times in the Bible does it say Jesus marveled. This is one of those cases. He marveled at belief here, and in another occasion, he marveled at unbelief. You can take that to the bank. That's interesting. Only 2 times does it say he marveled. He was astonished. He marveled at faith, and he marveled at a lack of faith. Faith in a man in whom you probably wouldn't expect to find faith, and then he marveled because he didn't find faith in those he should have found it. Might we sometimes find people... And let me just say something here. There are some times, we preach the New Testament. We preach the New Testament church. And there are a lot of religious people in the world that we recognize probably don't line up in some doctrinal issues, but are there not some times that we can even see an example where we might say, boy, they're working more than us, or they're doing this more than us, or they have more faith in some area than maybe we would. And that's what you see here. You see a man here who had faith. Now, Jesus complimented this man's faith. Now, if I'm like Jesus, I'm going to compliment others as well. I'm going to do my best to do that. I need to learn to compliment people for their work, for their deeds, for good things that they do. And I don't do this, and when I compliment, and I've done that since I've been here. I don't mean I've followed Jesus perfectly, but I try to abide by this. I try to say nice things to people when I think that it's something that I should say. Domestic terrorism, has been a terrible thing, and it wasn't that long ago that we saw a shooting, over in Texas, and over here, not in this state, wasn't it, Akron, or here not long ago? Terrible things. Those bombers, those men that are in the Boston Marathon, they made those pressure cooker bombers and things. But when that stuff starts happening, there's a saying that goes around: if you see something, say something. And I know that sometimes someone's going to say, well, yeah, people called the police and they called the FBI. Yeah, I know that. But that's still a pretty good thought. If you see someone that's really behaving strangely and they're somebody that's just, they're not all there anyway, and you think, well, they look like they're about to do something, it would be a good practice to say something. Let me take that phrase, if you see something, say something, and turn that around to positive things. If you see something, say something. Wouldn't that be a good way to live? When you see something that's noteworthy, when you see something that is, commendable, say something. It won't cost you $1. It won't cost you $1 to say something kind for someone, for your fellow man. Jesus, it didn't cost him a thing to be astonished. I've not found so great a faith, no, not even in Israel. Jesus complimented this man. And so let me encourage us to be constantly looking for good in others, letting them know that we appreciate them. Proverbs 15:23 says, a word spoken in due season, how good it is. You've heard the illustration, at least, that if you as a boss tell your, chew out your employees when they, do something bad, and you're just always on their case. You think that's going to do you think this management by fear, and I'm going to yell at them every day, and boy, they're going to be here, they're going to be doing it. That's not a good management style, by the way. That really doesn't work that well. Then they're afraid they're going to mess up, and they're going to mess up every day. But you go along and slap someone on the back and say, that's awesome. You did an awesome job. You did that. You did great. Not all your employees maybe show up on time or work while they're there. Maybe you have one that does show up on time. He works while he's there. You never say a word about it. What's his job? You say something about that. Say something about that. What about the waitress or waiter? They did a good job. Give them a good tip. Give them a good tip, or at least let them know that, I tell you what, I appreciate your service. Well, you were right here. I never saw the bottom of my coffee cup while I was sitting here. I appreciate that. Maybe it's a fellow worker. They do their job, and you don't have to take up for them. And sometimes they help you do your job. Maybe it's your spouse. He keeps the grass cut. He's done it for 30 years. He takes pride in that lawn out there. You think he's out there playing on the tractor, and maybe he is a little bit, but he's out there and the grass looks good. Would it hurt you to say, our yard looks really nice? Maybe he keeps the cars clean, and he washes them up, keeps them clean, Would it hurt you to say something about that? What about, and I know roles sometimes are a little bit reversed sometimes. Sometimes we all help in a house in different directions. But she's made that meatloaf for 20 years. Well, she still likes to hear that it tastes good and she appreciates your work. Imagine a family sitting down night after night after night, and maybe the mother there in that home, she's cooking day in and day out, and you never say anything to her about it. You think that might get on her or make her feel a little underappreciated? I think it would. How about if you tell her that you appreciate it and you love her and you thank her for doing that? Maybe it's a song leader and you say, well, I appreciate you getting up there and leading those songs. I could never do that like you do. Boy, I appreciate that. You put some thought into that and you picked out some good songs and you led us in a good way. Maybe it's a young man who reads Scripture for the first time. Someone heads the Lord's table for the first time. Someone's growing and you notice it. You say, it wasn't that long ago you became a Christian and man, you're really growing. You're just encourage them. What am I doing? I'm trying to follow the example of Christ and compliment others. Let's consider our last one here. And it's later in the chapter, Matthew chapter 8, and it is Jesus changed people. And I'm going to read 28 through 34. And these are 2 demon-possessed men. Let me tell you, just so you'll know, when you read what we call the synoptic gospels at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they call them the synoptic gospels because, they're very similar, and you'll read parallel accounts. Well, sometimes they just don't completely line up. For example, Matthew's going to say there are 2 demoniacs, and then Mark and Luke are going to mention 1 demoniac. Why is that? Was that a contradiction? No. Matthew mentioned that there were 2. He gave more fuller information, and Mark would say he mentioned the more notorious of the 2. There isn't a contradiction there, but you'll read one account, it'll say there's 2, and you read another, and it'll say 1. Sometimes it does that with miracles. 2 blind men, 1 blind man. Well, in this text, Jesus crosses, and just take this picture, he crosses the Sea of Galilee. In fact, on the way across, he stills the storm. Matthew chapter 8 is where he's sleeping in the ship, and the storm arises. He's asleep. They wake him up. He rebukes them for their lack of faith. He stills the storm and says, "Peace, be still." There in that great text. And then when he gets over the other side, there's a man that runs to him. He's a demon-possessed man. And let me read the text because I'll talk about it and I'll forget to read it. Verse 28, when he had come to the other side, to the country of the Gergesenes, some say Gerasenes, some say Gergesenes. It's same area, but just different manuscripts use different words. And there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a good way off from them there was a herd of swine feeding. So the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out, permit us to go away into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." And when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea, that's the Sea of Galilee, and perished in the water. Then those who kept them fled, etc., went into the city. Now, the parallel account over in Mark 5, I want to read that, just 2 through 5. Let me read that quickly. And it says, when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. That's a word you use for a wild animal. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. Now, let me set that picture. Jesus crosses the sea. Now, this is one who just stilled a terrible storm. In fact, one commentator says the word there can be translated a squall of wind, a hurricane. That word for storm that Jesus just took care of. I might, if I saw a man like that who was so strong he could break chains in 2, he's cutting himself, he's a wild man, he doesn't have any clothes on. I step off the boat onto the shore and he's running to me. I'd probably be stepping back in the boat. I may be getting in the water, but not the Lord. He stood his ground, didn't bother him. And this man ran, it says he worshipped him. These demons that were within this man. This is the man that we call Legion, the man who said, his name is Legion because we are many. A legion, by the way, was 6,000 men. Whereas a centurion had oversight over 100 men, a legion was 6,000. I don't know how many demons were in this man, but there were these swine feeding. He cast them into those swine there. Someone else, and I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but I had a man say to me one time, this shows that even the Jews didn't care because they considered, those swine as unclean animals, and they would take care of those swine. Jesus was in Decapolis here. The other side of the Sea of Galilee is a place called Decapolis. Decapolis, Deca and Polis, there are 10 cities. There were 10 Gentile cities. These were Gentiles who lived here in this place. So Jesus went over there, healed that man. There, and in Mark chapter 5, it says down in verse 15 that man was sitting and clothed and in his right mind. Jesus changed this man. He changed this man. Now, what a change Jesus made in the lives of these men. Really, there were 2 men here. Let's make the application. Are we changing people by the way that we interact with them? Are we changing people? I've had some wonderful influences in my life. Wonderful people who have really influenced me and encouraged me. Let me tell you about one. I've mentioned Cecil Dotson this week, and he preached at Chester over 50 years ago. I don't know how long ago it was, but he was a great preacher and a great man, and he baptized me, and he influenced me. He really did. When I became a Christian, I was 20 years old when I became a Christian. I wasn't raised in the church, and when I obeyed the gospel, I wanted to serve in the church. I wanted to do something, and I was a carpenter, and I didn't have any education. I knew very little about the Bible. I didn't own any books except Johnson's Notes. I was given Johnson's Notes when I became a Christian, and maybe you're familiar with Johnson's Notes. That's all that I had. And Cecil was getting older. At this point, he was in his 80s at this point, and he needed a break. You'll just ride an old horse until you just put him in the grave. And, he teaches all the Bible classes, does all the invitations, does all the work. Sometimes even a good man, you can work him too much. And he would, from the pulpit, sometimes say, if somebody would like to take one of these Bible classes, I'd really appreciate it. And so he asked me one day, he said, would you take one of the Bible classes? Now, mind you, I just gave you the background. I'm 20 years old. I wasn't raised in the church, but I had ambition. I wanted to do something. And I said, well, I'll try my best. He said, all right, well, Wednesday night you can teach the Bible class. People today, you ask them, they want a month and a half to prepare, but he just said, Wednesday night you can teach the Bible class. And I said, okay. And when I got home and I got to looking, it was 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And if you know anything about the Bible, this is the man that had his father's wife, and they withdrew from that man, and it said, deliver such a one to Satan. Well, I'm new to the church. I had no idea what this was about. So I went down to the OVU bookstore, and I didn't really have a lot of money, and so I stood in there reading all the commentaries that I could while I was there without buying them, just to say, what in the world is this about? And Cecil told me, he said, if you get to the point that you don't know what to say, he said, I'll just speak up and I'll fill in. I'll just fill in. And okay. And so he did that. And anytime I would start talking quietly or low, he would say, speak up, we can't hear you. And I would speak up a little louder. And so that might bother some people, and it probably did me, but he always kept encouraging me. And then one Sunday he said, would you come out here in my car? I've got a box I can't carry. And I was sure. And I go out there, and we raise the lid up, and he has this little pocket knife. He takes it out, and he says, open that up. And I opened it up, and it was a set of Gospel Advocate commentaries, on the New Testament. And he said, put those in your car. He bought those. And he did that for me over and over and over, those kinds of things. Lards quarterly, Moses' lard, there's 5, and he would bring me one occasionally. I have them all now. They were his, and he brought them to me occasionally. And I say, this is a preacher to a younger man, but I don't know, but I don't suppose I would be standing here preaching today if it weren't for the encouragement and for the help that man gave me. And so this is an illustration, and I know personal illustrations. I'm not trying to elevate myself. I'm trying to elevate what Cecil did. And I'm elevating what Jesus did, and I'm trying to challenge us. And so let me challenge you, and I'm going to challenge myself also. Try to make a difference in someone's life. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's a person that a lot of homes today with Very difficult situations for kids. Very difficult situations for kids. And maybe you can be an encouragement to a child and encourage them a little bit. Maybe they don't get a lot of encouragement, but you can encourage them. Ask them about school. Ask them how their school's going. Ask them what grade they're in. Ask them if they like their teacher. Ask them, if they play sports. Ask them about that. Maybe in the congregation, and I don't know the setup here, how many kids you have here, but maybe you have a girl who plays soccer or a boy who plays basketball or something like that. Go to some of their games. Watch them play those games. Encourage people. Help people. Be in someone's life. Compliment someone for doing a good job. Say something nice about someone. Smile and greet people. Hold the door for somebody. And you'll make a difference in someone's life. And in doing that, you're living out Christianity. Christianity is not just within the confines of this building. Sundays and Wednesdays I'm here, and gospel meetings I'm here, and out there I'm like everyone else. No, that's not Christianity. And that kind of Christianity won't get you to heaven. That's not the kind of Christianity isn't centered in a building. This isn't a temple. This isn't a fort that we built. No, Christianity, I love that sign, leave to serve. I love that, leave to serve. And let's look for opportunities to be like the Lord, to change people. And so to recap, He cared for people. He complimented people. He changed people. If I were like Jesus, how would I treat others? Just like this. Just like this. And I'm going to look for opportunities. And it may not be in your nature. It may not be in your nature to be like that. That's okay. You may not be as good at it as maybe someone else, but do your best to be kind to others and live Christianity and let them see that. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, we haven't talked about the plan of salvation at all, but we have talked about a great standard for us to follow. It's the Son of God, to be conformed to the image of the Son of God. If you're not a child of God, you become a Christian by believing Jesus Christ is the Son of God, repenting of your sins, confessing your faith in Him before men, and by being buried in the waters of baptism. Jesus said, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned." Mark 16 and verse 16. Raised to walk in what Paul called the newness of life. If you're just like you were before, you did something wrong. You should be different. You should be different now. Live differently. Live like Christ. You're not going to do it perfectly. Remember that A and that B and that C? You never did it perfectly, but the more you did it, probably the closer you got to that standard. And that's the hope. That as you live your life, you're growing. Oh, your body might be aging and decaying. Isn't that what Paul said? Our outward man is perishing, but our inward man is being renewed day by day. Yeah, that's true. It doesn't matter how old you might be and how your old body might be wearing out on you here. You need to be closer and closer and closer to the Lord. If you are a child of God and you become unfaithful, beg His forgiveness and repent. Come back to Him, give your life back to Him. If we might help you tonight, won't you come while we stand and sing together?